Today we're starting off with a chocolate meringue pie, and then we're also going to be making a pumpkin pie. But for my pies, I use Marie Collander's frozen pie crust. These are my absolute favorite. They are so good. If you want to make crust from scratch, feel free to do that. We're going to follow the directions on the back of the label for this pie crust. We will be doing the filled pie directions. We're going to start separating our eggs now. So this recipe for the chocolate pie itself calls for 3 egg yolks. So if you're not making meringue, you still just want the yolks. My meringue recipe is for a 3 egg meringue, so I'm going to be taking these whites that are from my egg yolks that I'm using and separating them and keeping them. So I'm using my vegetable chopper. It comes with an egg separator attachment, and I'm just going to put that on and separate these, but you still have to be careful even with this because some of the yolks can still slip through. So we don't want any yolks in our egg whites because it can ruin them when you go to make your meringue. Meringue can be very difficult at times, but it's also very simple to make, so just don't be intimidated by it. But we are going to let our egg whites come to room temperature, and we're going to start working on our dry ingredients back to the chocolate pie. I'm doing these consecutively along each other. My meringue turns out much better whenever I get them both done at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and mix in a 1/2 cup of cocoa, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, or you could do a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. And then I'm going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I also did 1 cup of sugar. I'm also measuring out a teaspoon of vanilla, but I'm setting that to the side. We won't add that to the pie until it's fully thickened. I'm going to set that to the side for a minute. It's so much easier when you prepare these things. And I'm going to move over to my crust. I'm going to poke it. I've got my oven preheated to 400 degrees, and I'm going to bake that in the oven for about 12 minutes. But while that's baking, we're going to start with our meringue. My egg whites are room temperature, so I'm going to pour those into my stand mixer, and I'm also going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. I'm going to mix that until my egg whites become frothy. Once that becomes frothy, we're going to start adding in our sugar. So we're going to do a total of 6 tablespoons, but we are going to do it 1 tablespoon at a time and let it mix in until it's dissolved and mixed in well before we add our next tablespoon. So that way that the sugar will dissolve fully. And then once we finish doing that, we're going to let this set and mix up while we go back over and start with our wet ingredients for our chocolate pie filling. So my stand mixer is going to do the work for me. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do this with a metal bowl and a whisk or a hand mixer. But I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to go over here to my chocolate pie filling. I'm going to stir up my dry ingredients, and then I'm going to start adding in my wet ingredients. So I'm going to gradually mix in 2 cups of cold milk, and we're just going to keep mixing that in and stirring it slowly in to get all the lumps out with our whisk. The slower you do this and the more you mix it, the smoother of a texture that your pie is going to come out with. But sometimes these do have a little bit of lumps in them, and that's not a big deal. If you don't like that, you can always strain it through a mesh strainer or something. But mine came out pretty smooth, so I'm not going to worry with that. The main thing with the chocolate pie is that you need to keep this stirred, so we're just going to keep stirring it. We're going to add in the rest of our milk and just stir this up really well. We're also going to add in our 3 egg yolks now. Once we get those added in, we're just going to keep stirring this up. Stir, stir, stir. You want to make sure it stays mixed up. It doesn't stick to the bottom and it's not burning, because this can burn and it's not going to taste good if it does. So we've got to keep all this liquid moving around so it can thicken up really well. We want to make sure that this becomes thick, because if we don't and we just go ahead and put it in the pie shell, it is not going to set up and it's just going to run when you slice it, and it's not going to set up at all. But we're just going to really quick go over here and check my meringue, and it is still not done yet. We're going to do the test that I do. So I take my whisk off and I dip it down into my meringue and I pull it out. When you pull it out, it should make a little peak. And if that peak falls over after a couple of seconds, then your meringue is not stiff enough. This needs to be really stiff, because if it is not, it's going to flop and it's going to just weep after you take it out of the oven. When it starts cooling, it'll just kind of flop and melt away. So we turned our mixer back on. We checked our pie filling. It was still not thick enough, so we're going to let that cook and check our meringue again, and it is getting to where we want it to be. So I'm going to take my whisk and stick it down in there and look at it. And as you can see, that is really stiff. It's fluffy. If you want to add more flavor, you can add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla and mix that in. And then we're going to go back and check on our pie filling. It's done. It has become thick, almost like chocolate pudding is what you're expecting to see, but maybe just a little bit thicker. And then as this cools, it will set up. So we're going to add in our teaspoon of vanilla. And then we're going to mix that up, and then we're going to immediately go over here to our cooled pie crust. And we are immediately going to pour that into that. This is the part where you have to work very fast and move very quickly. You need to pour that into your pie crust and then smooth it out. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just get it smoothed out and even as best as you can. And then take your meringue and put it on top of this pie filling while it is extremely hot, fresh off the stove. If you let it cool, your meringue is not going to seal underneath and start cooking, and it's going to weep. Any moisture that starts under your meringue is going to spread across the whole pie, and it's going to cause your meringue to start collapsing and weeping. So get that put on there and smoothed out. And also my oven is preheated to 325 degrees Fahrenheit while I'm doing this as well. But once you get it across your pie, you can add a little bit of designs if you want. You can take the back of a metal spoon or a rubber spatula and make some swirls in it, or you can take a hand mixer piece like a whisk or something and you can go ahead and stick it down in there and kind of twist and pull it out, and it's going to make a little peak. Once you finish getting your meringue the way you want it, you need to put it in the oven for about 15 to 25 minutes until it is that golden brown all the way across. Your meringue is firm. Once that's done, you need to let this completely cool on the counter. If you put it in the refrigerator, it is going to weep and cause your meringue to collapse. And once that is completely cooled, then you can store it in your refrigerator and let it get chilled. And that's it. Enjoy! Next, I'm making a pumpkin pie, and I'm also using Marie Collander's pie crust again. These are frozen, and it says to leave it frozen, and then when you fill it, to bake it in the oven. So we're going to move on and work on our filling. I've got 1 can of pumpkin, and this is a 15-ounce can. I've also got a 14-ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, and I'm going to dump that in there as well. Once we get that dumped in there and get that can scraped out, we're going to add in 2 large eggs, and we're just going to drop those right in there. I was trying to break those one-handed and it caused me to accidentally drop some eggshell in there, so I had to get that out. But next we're going to go ahead and add in our seasonings to this. So for this recipe, I'm using 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Also, I'll be doing a 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger, a 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So as you can see, it's not a whole lot of ingredients and it's fairly simple. We're just going to whisk these up really well until it's smooth, and then once we get that done and get it whisked up, we're just going to pour this into our pie shell. Now the oven has been preheating at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, so once we get all this done and mixed up, we're going to pour this into our pie shell, and then we're going to put that on a cookie sheet or a baking sheet of some kind. And then we're going to place this in the oven for 15 minutes. And then after those 15 minutes, you want to reduce your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you want to bake this for 35 to 40 minutes. If you're not sure if it's done, you can touch the center, and if it springs back up and feels firm, you know it's done. Or you can also use a toothpick and stick it in the center. If it comes out clean, it's also done. You want to let this cool down on the countertop and then refrigerate it, and once it's chilled, it's ready to serve. I hope you all enjoy these pie recipes, and thanks for watching.